Welcome to the Feehery podcast, brought to you by EFB Advocacy. EFB means excellent for business. I'm joined by my two colleagues, John Easton and Adam Belmar. School is closed. Winter is not only coming, it has arrived with a bang. And we at EFB are very excited about the new year. So let's get to the theories. Theory 1. A wolf in sheep's clothing. Washington is abuzz about the new book written by Michael Wolff, Fire and Fury. The book has infuriated, see what I did there? President Donald Trump, and led the president to fire back at his former chief strategist, Steve Bannon. Here's my theory. This book isn't going to be good for this administration. But if there's one good thing that's going to come from it, it is the divorce of Steve Bannon from Donald Trump. Adam Belmar, I have one question for you. How did Michael Wolff get so much access to this White House?
Well, there's been reporting, John, about this, and clearly nobody gets this kind of access without the president himself being aware of it. It would appear that this was driven in no small part by then Chief Strategist Steve Bannon. However, having been inside the White House, having worked as a Deputy Communications Director, I can tell you that the White House Press Secretary, the Deputy Press Secretary, the White House Communications Director, and the Deputy Communications Directors were all keenly aware. And the fact that they parked Mr. Wolff in the couch in the lobby of the White House in the West Wing, let me tell you, high traffic area. Really good place to catch a lot of tidbits and to just sort of do a pit stop, pull in, chat them up, move along. This was ill-conceived from the start.
The proverbial fly on the wall, but when the fly, John Easton, is Michael Wolff, who has a history of writing things that are a little bit fiction with a little bit of fact put in, and people aren't quite sure. There was a biography he wrote of Rupert Murdoch, and Rupert Murdoch is quoted in this book extensively, apparently. This is kind of malpractice from a communications director standpoint, don't you think?
It can be. I mean, I think that what happens in these situations is it can look like it can be very attractive. It can be looked upon by the communications team that Adam rightly described as a good idea, as hey, we can control this, and this will come out really to our benefit. I mean, Donald J. Trump can charm the socks off anybody. I actually was part of a story like this when a senator I worked for came in, and the Oregonian newspaper did a year in the life of him, and we granted access for a full year. Granted, the photographer and the reporter would come. This is a chief political reporter for the Oregonian, but he was headquartered in Portland. But when he came into town, we would give him a lot of access, and he would sit on the couch a lot in our office. But there was always this acknowledgement that, look, he had his job to do, we had our job to do, and they were very different. And you had to set the ground rules, and those ground rules were tight. I mean, you can't just let him in on every conversation. You can't let him in on every event. This thing has to be structured, and you have to meet and talk about exactly why you're letting him, the reporter, in on which conversation. It's very difficult. It's a very fine line to walk, and I think with this, they probably got carried away.
There is some good ideas with having access to reporters who are good reporters, who have good reputation. I think that makes sense in a lot of ways. You do want to tell the story of what you're trying to do in office, and I think that makes a lot of sense. But what the story that Michael Wolff came up with is a story of complete dysfunction of a brand new White House that doesn't know what the heck it's doing.
And I think that's part of this. Everybody was new to the West Wing. So few people had ever served there. So few people had even come to Washington and worked in that realm before. So they didn't know what they were doing. The president clearly was at the very beginning of a steep learning curve, and it was chaos. And just right there permeating throughout all of it seems to have been this omnipresent wolf in sheep's clothing, as you rightly put it. And I don't know what they expected to come from all of this, but even a month in, John, I think they could have assumed that they were way in over their head.
So, this president does like to be authentic with the American people. That is one of his greatest traits, and that's what the whole Twitter thing's all about. He also pulls the New York Times in. I mean, he was at Mar-a-Lago a couple weeks ago, and this Michael Schmidt, a New York Times reporter, he just kind of called him over and
When
said,
it strikes his fancy.
When it strikes his fancy. The thing about this president is he loves the press even as he hates the press. And so that's, most politicians, seasoned politicians, are terrified of the press because they're so risk averse. But this president lets it all hang out because he's had this symbiotic relationship.
It is a symbiotic relationship.
Yeah, but the problem is that he may let it all hang out, and he can control only one portion of this White House, himself and what he says. And sometimes, obviously, that's a little erratic. But in this case, Michael Wolff has all this access to multitude of West Wing aides, and including probably some of Donald Trump. But that's a lot of input. That's a lot of avenues to get information and maybe misinformation, innuendo, the rumor, et cetera, et cetera.
I think the other thing to keep in mind here, and Feehery said this a lot last year, especially at the beginning, we had a White House staff that was leaking constantly about each other, knives out, and here we have this person with even more access who was constantly there, but holding things on an embargoed basis. And so some of the insights here, I think, are going to come from reconciling what Wolff is reporting, what he says that he was told, against that sort of backdrop of what was being reported day to day to day. And it will put a lot more light on what was going on behind the scenes. That's interesting. And I think hopefully it will give the White House communications team some reason to button it up a bit.
Well, the interesting thing is, we don't know what portions of this book that's coming out are accurate and what parts are not accurate. We do know that there's a lot of other White House reporters that are corroborating a lot of the same dysfunction. Mm-hmm. And that dysfunction is not necessarily from the president, but from the president's staff. I was on Facebook about 5 minutes ago, and a friend of mine just posted on Facebook about how he was fed all kinds of really bad information about Sean Spicer that he never went with because he thought it was all ridiculous. And so Michael Wolff would have published all that stuff. And so this is the thing that's interesting about this book is he just threw it all in there and say, I want to sell books. I want to do this because I want to get the juiciest thing I can get, no matter if it's true or not.
Well, right, and his reputation, Michael Wolff's reputation, could really affect the outcome of this whole book and its success. I think if you compare this, remember, this guy's an outsider with this kind of reputation as sort of a bit of a questionable journalist. Look what happened in the Clinton administration after the first couple of years. Remember the George Stephanopoulos book?
Right.
I mean, George Stephanopoulos was his communications director. He came out, and it was not a flattering book because it told of the chaos of that first year. I mean, massive chaos, nothing that we've seen till probably now. But that's a heck of a lot more legit and credible than what we're seeing now. This book, because he's an outsider with the reputation that he has, can be much more easily dismissed than, say, George Stephanopoulos, who is still at the top of ABC.
Yeah, no, that's all very true. And at least I can say that I read the George Stephanopoulos book.
Right.
I do not have a copy of the Wolff book yet. So we're sort of going on the pre-buttles, the pre-game spin, the reporting on the stuff that's been just dripped out. But I know in this bitter cold what I'm going to do this weekend. I'm going down to East City Books to pick up a copy of this bad boy and cuddle up for a read.
Wow, that's a lot of dedication to the story. I'm not going to do that, but maybe I should.
I'm going to reread George Stephanopoulos.
I would say that there were like 15 people were out at midnight in front of Kramer Books in D.C. when it's 20 below zero, waiting for them to sell this book, which I think is ridiculous. I mean, come on. Let's get back to my original theory here about Steve Bannon and Donald Trump. I mean, this is a weird relationship of two very highly egotistical men who, came together, but were on separate sides on the Roy Moore, Luther Strange primary. Steve Bannon is trying to launch a whole crusade against the establishment. Donald Trump now is the establishment in many ways. So how do you think this plays out? I think that you've already seen that Steve Bannon now is losing the Mercer money, which is probably good. Steve Bannon is nothing with it. He doesn't have any money. What are your thoughts, John Easton, on what this means about Steve Bannon and what that does mean for Donald Trump?
Well, I think that what we're seeing play out right now is it's tough to mess with the President of the United States.
Yeah.
And, I mean, the microphone that the President of the United States possesses is something that nobody in the world has. And the more that Steve Bannon does this, the more he does get pushed to this alt-right edge. Right. And as you said, John, he is establishment by virtue of being the president, by being the elected president of the United States, even though he tries to be anti-establishment as much as he can. But I just think that he has really stepped in it, and I think it's going to affect Steve Bannon's power and effectiveness where he wants to play throughout this year. I mean, I think it's really tough to tell, but that's, at least right now, that's what it looks like.
Adam, let me say this. When Steve Bannon got his picture on the cover of Time magazine as a staff member, I predicted that he'd be dead. And then he got fired about 3 months later. But I think for Steve Bannon, he loved it because he's for him, it's all about Steve Bannon, when actually it's all about Donald Trump. What are your thoughts?
I think that the second season is off to a roaring start. The writers have decided to bring us plot lines that go to 11 constantly, and it is capturing the attention of the American people. We're investigating past plots and moving forward. I think the president is a master at distracting and also creating a lot of energy. The serious part of this is that Steve Bannon may never have been as powerful as his image and imagined importance. Having said that, there is a tremendous amount of substantive focus right now regarding his comments on the propriety, if not the treasonous action that he so calls Don Jr.'s meeting with Jared Kushner in August of 2006 with the Russians at Trump Tower. His comment on these things and his viewpoint, whether and when he speaks to the special counsel Mueller, are important. He will play a big role in season 2, and I'm just keen to continue to wait and see, but I don't necessarily believe that the president has fallen out with Steve Bannon for good.
So Steve Bannon is, as a character, diminished quite a bit, but not dead yet.
Not dead yet.
Interesting. All right. Theory 2, Camp David, tete-a-tete. This weekend, the president is going to meet with key members of the House and Senate leadership to plot strategy for the coming legislative year at Camp David. I've never been to Camp David, but
I have. It is a very, very cool place to be.
Well, it's supposed to be very cold this weekend. Here's my theory. This meeting is extremely important to the future of the Republican Party. If the House, the Senate, and the White House can get on the same page and come up with a realistic game plan, they can have a successful year. But if the House and the Senate are at odds and never can come up with a strategy, a coordinated strategy, the House is in danger and the Senate might be in danger as well. John Easton, as our resident Senate expert, do you think they will hammer out a strategy, and what do you think will be part of that strategy?
They have to hammer out a strategy, because the ability to make some sort of progress in 2018 depends completely on their ability to dispatch with the last items of 2017. And that's what they still have to do. They still have to complete the work of 2017. We're talking about going to have to raise the spending caps for 2018, which, again, should be done by September 30th, and it's September 5th. You have an immigration deal, which needs to somehow they need to split the baby on a deal on DACA, which protects the children from deportation, and border security. They got to have both of those, or else it's not going anywhere. You've got several healthcare fixes. They're extremely important to get done as part of this package. And you've got FISA, which is this surveillance law they have to reauthorize, even for a short amount of time. And now they're talking about maybe some energy tax extenders throwing into the mix. This is all just part of a continuing resolution to keep the government open for the time being. That has nothing to do with just getting a final spending bill for 2018 done. So there is so much to hammer out. And I think that the most important piece here of this meeting you're talking about is that Democrats have a ton of leverage right now.
Yeah.
And it's all in the Senate, of course. It is now 51 Republicans, 49 Democrats. That is obviously a razor-thin margin. And Chuck Schumer, I think, the leader of the Democrats in the Senate, is okay by going and just doing these short-term things because he knows that he holds so much power in his hands to whether to give in or not. I think it's just the Republicans just are going to have to give, just as the Democrats are, in order to get something, especially on defense.
So if the Democrats will be able to pick off the Republicans, it increases their ability to get leverage, to get more of their priorities done. And that's why Republicans have to stick together. I think ultimately, to John's point, Adam, we've got to get all the stuff that has to get done, hopefully in the first 2 or 3 months. And that includes DACA, healthcare, and the spending bills. And then there's the things that they want to get done. And there's two options. The Senate Majority Leader wants to do an infrastructure bill that he thinks could get bipartisan support. The Speaker of the House wants to get welfare reform and part of entitlement reform. Who do you think is going to win that debate within the House or the Senate? Do you think it's which side will win that?
I'm not sure whether it's a House or Senate win. I think that the President of the United States is probably going to be sitting up on top of Mount Katahdin. No, not Mount. That's in Maine. At Camp David, with these leaders saying, "Look, you guys told me that we needed to start with health care, and we should have started with tax reform. And I think I want to try it my way." And I think he's going to be pushing hard to say my instincts are the winners, and we need to follow my thought on what goes first in the order of operations. I'm thinking about the idea of how Camp David works in their favor for this kind of meeting. Sure, it's private, and sure, it's a great place where you can have sort of intimate, long-form conversations, but it's also a little bit of like a prison. If they stick you in your cabin and the president doesn't want to talk to you until he wants to talk to you, and you're just sort of sitting around, it could be a waste of time for these folks, or it could turn out quite well. I think that if they come and tell the President of the United States this is the way it's got to be, he's going to bristle at it, feeling once bitten, twice shy after last year. So I think that the Senate Majority Leader still has a lot of sway with the President, but if they don't have a clear path for a political reasoning for how they can get these things done and keep momentum going, the President's just going to push hard on what he wants to do.
Well, I think it's interesting you talk about a prison because I do think that one of the biggest challenges for congressional leaders is to get President Trump to focus. And so it's not just a prison for the congressional leaders, it's also in many ways a prison for the president. They've got to get him to focus on...
It's like a steel cage match. They've locked each other in. They have to...
I think that's exactly right. But John Easton, talking about this, infrastructure versus welfare reform, which one do you think plays out better with the voters?
First, I think if they can get a deal on immigration, that's just something that's eluded the last two presidents who both had 8-year terms. And if they can get that done, I think that would show extremely well for particularly independents. But then on your question, I think the infrastructure would be, again, you're just showing it's such a deliverable to the American people. I know it's expensive, and that is going to be a complicated equation as to how to pay for it and how big it's going to be. Donald Trump wants $1 trillion. It's not going to be $1 trillion. But if they can get something, I just think that plays
Let me ask you
well.
on both those things, because I think there's a counter narrative to this, and that is, are you worried about the Republican, conservative, Trump base being disillusioned with the Republicans if they do something on Obamacare, on immigration, and then on a big spending bill on infrastructure? Are you at all worried that in a base election that a midterm is, that this would alienate the Republican base?
No, I don't think so. You've got a huge victory on the tax bill, right? And then you've got I mean, there is not going to be an immigration deal without strong border security. I don't know how much of that is wall, and I don't know how much of that is, aerial surveillance and all that. But I do think that
the president wants his wall.
It would be seen. I think it'd be received really well, and I think he's going to get it.
Yeah.
I do. I think he's going to get something. They're not going to get everything they want. He's not going to get everything. You know how that's going to work. But I do think that, I think on the transportation or infrastructure, I actually think that given if he's got an immigration win, he's got a tax win, I think he's got a little bit of room to play on infrastructure.
Can I ask a question on that? Last year, we had, it wasn't an election year, and we had these special rules that allowed for a simple majority in the Senate. This year, it is an election year. The majorities for the Republicans are in danger in the House and the Senate. So that sort of halves the year, if you will. They're going to be out, the politics of elections. But we're also not operating under special rules in the Senate. They need 60 votes. What impact does that have on what order of operations?
Back up here. The special rules, it's called reconciliation. And reconciliation is really dedicated to one major thing, which I was putting in place, and that is to reduce the deficit. And so welfare reform really does fit in pretty well under reconciliation because it's, you're trying to deal with an entitlement program, and it has a direct impact on spending. So we did reconciliation to pass welfare reform in 1996, threw it on President Clinton's desk. And that actually helped Republicans maintain their majority and also helped President Clinton, ironically, get reelected. Because President Clinton went beyond his base and kind of appealed to the middle, like John's talking about with infrastructure. And so I think that the special rules are one thing. The bigger strategic question is are you going to try to appeal to the base, or are you going to try to appeal to a wider swath through governing and a wider swath of the voters, and maybe depress the Democratic base, and depress the Democratic base by showing this president can govern. And John Easton, I'm not sure which way they're going to go. I'm not sure if they're going to go. I know that McConnell would rather go for an infrastructure bill, and I know that Paul Ryan would rather go for a welfare bill.
Yeah, to your point about playing to the base, I think the president's been playing to the base just about all year, and I think what the sort of the silent asset that he has right now is just this economy. This stock market that's booming, and wages appear to be going up, which is the best news of all. Unemployment remains down. If that is the case, that is really wind at his back and Republicans' back. But it's gonna require more than that because of the president's behavior. Just his behavior. Yeah. You need something to offset that for Republicans that are running and trying to keep their majorities. And I think the deliverables are what can tell people it's okay. I know the guy's a little crazy, but things are really going in the right direction.
Here's one thing about infrastructure that I really like, and I paid close attention to the president's national security strategy statements that came out at the end of the year, not really well covered, especially as tax reform was happening and folks were getting out of town. But the president seems to recognize very clearly that infrastructure is not just roads and bridges. It's transportation, it's telecommunication infrastructure. There are a lot of elements to what we need to do to invest in infrastructure that not only create jobs and help companies to capitalize on the tax laws, so the government is going to, as you put it in your column this week, leverage a great deal of private money as opposed to just a flat $1 trillion of, as President Obama would have said, it's shovel-ready jobs. Right. This isn't about putting shovels in the ground everywhere. This is about things that are much more strategic about American infrastructure, and I like the fact that the president's actually leading on that.
Well, the question remains on infrastructure versus welfare. On welfare, what's going to happen. The Democrats are not going to support you, and you're just going to have to go and do it. And infrastructure, and this goes, Adam, to your point about the special rules, reconciliation rules. You don't need the Democrats. But on infrastructure, you desperately need the Democrats because you need to get, at least 60 votes to get it past the Senate. And, you really do need to get, some Democrats in the House. And that's hard because I think Nancy Pelosi's like, screw these guys. I'm not going to give these guys any lifeline at all. And the Democrats have moved significantly to the left as a caucus. They're much less willing to cooperate with Republicans, mostly because they hate Trump so much, and their base hates Trump so much. So I think the question that they have to ask themselves is, can they get the Democrats to cooperate, and who are those Democrats who are going to cooperate? And, John, what are your thoughts on that?
I would add the Democratic base hates Trump so much, but also when you come out of the tax bill took about almost 6 months, maybe a little less. It was a wholly partisan exercise because of reconciliation, because of the procedural move that the Republicans made on it, and it just assured that this was going to be, nerves would be frayed after this in a very partisan way in the United States Senate in particular, but also the House. So I believe that recovering from that is going to be difficult. But to do reconciliation 2 years in a row and this time try it with welfare reform would just really double down on that partisanship. Yeah. So do I think, is 60 votes possible in the Senate? It is possible. A lot of hurdles to overcome. You would really have to come quite a ways to try to pick off 9 Democrats. That would be difficult, but it's doable.
Adam?
I think that you guys are right on with the political analysis. I do believe that the president feels in his gut, rightly so, that having a monumental legislative capstone achievement at the end of his first year is exactly what he needed, and he's got a taste for it, and he wants more. And I think he's ready to get it, whether it's through a purely partisan effort where he can get rid of the Democrats and make it possible on simple majority terms, or otherwise. He's going to do whatever he possibly can to try and get tangible results, and I think that's just all he's focused on right now.
Theory 3, baby, it's cold outside. So schools canceled in much of the Washington, D.C. area today, despite the fact that the roads are fine and we don't have any real measurable snow. Here's my theory. This is all driven by school administrators who are worried more about lawsuits than they are about teaching our children. We're teaching our kids by keeping them home exactly the wrong message. And Adam, I think it's tragic. Adam, is it so cold for the kids to go to school? Understanding that school is inside, not outside.
No, I don't think it's too cold for the kids to go outside and to be at school. And I was shocked that we had another day off of school. But I will say this, John. I think, as with many things, schools and snow are constantly fighting the last war. You know, decisions are made today to try and make up for poor decisions and criticism that came before. The same thing with mayors and whether they salted, pre-salted, and stuff like this. One more thing. These schools set aside all kinds of days in their calendars for snow days. And if they're too aggressive, then they end up with all this extra time at the end of the year, and nobody wants that. So I think they're kind of keen on taking their opportunities to roll in a day. Hey, it's built in. Let's make it a 3-day week. I will just finish by saying one thing. It's cold as hell out there at the bus stop. It's very icy, and I think that in these counties outside of Washington, D.C., you can call us weak. You can call us, mid-Atlantic sissies, but I think that it wasn't altogether unwise to pull the plug for the last 2 days.
John Easton, are we teaching our children the wrong lessons about how to deal with, cold, or are we telling our little darlings the right thing, that they can sit around, play on their iPads, watch television, and not do anything while the parents go to school, go to work? Speaking
from parents who have kids at home right now, no, I think that's a stretch. I think that we teach our kids what we teach our kids. That has nothing to do with if they have 2 days off of school or 2 snow days or 4 snow days.
But there's no snow.
I understand. It's a snow day. There's no snow. But I think Adam's correct. I think that probably the calling of a snow day for a principal is probably among the top 2 or 3 worst things that they have
Yeah,
to
it's
deal
got to
with.
be the most stressful
It's
part of the job.
It's damned if you do and damned if you
Absolutely
don't.
right.
You don't please everybody. You probably please 50% of the parents, and I think it ultimately comes down to a safety issue, and they probably err on the side of caution every time, maybe too much. But I mean, I'll take it slightly different direction, and that is the members of Congress who played in the cheap seats by criticizing Washington, D.C. for our wimpiness, if you want to say that, is getting a little tiresome. I mean, those who hail from...
I don't know. I think we are a bunch of wimps.
Those who hail from North Dakota or Minnesota or New England area, you can say all you want about, I can't believe these guys, they can't handle the cold. They can't... Well, we get a couple of really extreme days a year. We have to deal with these extremely hot days, which we're more than capable of handling. But when it comes to cold and snow and ice, we just don't get enough to put resources into it, right? So there's a bunch of bellyache in the federal government. Does half days, telecommuting, delayed.
I'm with
whatever.
him.
I just think that you get some member of Congress, who says, somebody said the other day, this is a snow day in D.C. in whatever state, it's called Wednesday. I mean, well, this isn't North Dakota. This isn't Minnesota. This is the Mid-Atlantic region that rarely gets down into the single digits. I get a little tired of it. I've been watching it for 20 plus years, and it's just...
Well, let me tell you something. When there's no snow on the ground, kids should be able to get their asses to school.
Well, I feel like you're putting it on the kids.
Schools are open.
A lot of these kids aren't getting to school on their own power. I mean, getting this entire fleet of buses, these school districts are running a transportation department. And
okay, so this is a bigger question. I mean, is this a lawsuit problem, or is this a problem with, transportation?
I think John Easton said it. It's a safety issue. If you're out there for half an hour more than you normally would, because mom and dad, you're on a delay instead of a cancel, and mom and dad had to go to work, and the bus doesn't arrive, and you don't know whether you can go back or come back, and no one knows where the bus is, it's problematic. And one way to avoid it is to do what they've done.
All right, well, I'll tell you what. You guys can take your position. I'm on the position of sending these kids to school when there's no snow on the ground. I don't care how cold it is. That's my theory.
That's my theory. I'm sticking to it.
Finally, in the spirit of the new year, Adam Belmar, what is your resolution for the year?
Well, having conquered anorexia in
you went there, did you?
I did, in 2017,
Wow.
I might need to bring the pendulum back in the other direction slightly. But in addition to my weight and health, which I think are very important for all folks, but certainly for the larger of us at the table, the other main New Year's resolution for me is to just try and be the best father that I can be, and try and improve how I'm, interfacing with my children as they grow up, and just try and really focus on what I can do to be a better dad in the new year. So that's where I'm focused.
That's heartfelt. I like that. Go ahead.
That is tough to follow.
Yeah. Wow. Woo.
So thank you for that. Professionally, it's obvious. I'm going to try to make this podcast, this weekly session, the best that it can possibly be. Improve it in any way, shape, or form. Second, I got 3. Second,
Wow. Okay.
I'm going to try to help improve this.
Let me zoom in on you. Okay, go ahead.
I'm going to try to make this Capitol Hill community the best that it can be as well, and help in any way possible. Got to do a better job with that. And then finally, the Washington Redskins. I am resolved to look past the incompetence of the Washington Redskins leadership, Snyder and Allen, and try to remain faithful and try to remain actually a fan. That is a resolution. I want to stick with those hardcore fans like the Cushmans out there who don't give up just because there's a bad
Cushman,
season.
I hope you're listening.
Don't give up just because they're in a bad season or because they have a bad owner, whatever. Because in the end, the team is about the community, not about 1 or 2 individuals.
I think that my resolution is to my resolutions, I don't really believe in resolutions because I always break them. So I'm not going to make too many bold proclamations. But I just, being part of this EFB team for me is a lot of fun. I want to, I just invest as much time and effort in making this team as successful as possible, and something that I'm really excited about for the new year. And then, the other thing that I really like doing is getting active, staying active, playing basketball, playing golf, playing with my kids, getting involved with the sports, watching my son's fastball go faster than mine ever did, which is really disappointing, but I can still beat him in golf, so I'm excited about that. And then, the other thing, just enjoy life for what it gives us. And I think that from my perspective, the Pope had a wonderful message today, which I think you should all read, just about being realistic about what this life's all about. And so that's, if I'm going to have a resolution, it's about being more realistic about what this life provides us, and being more grateful and happy for all the blessings that we have. And so from that, let me say that I hope you enjoy these podcasts. We're going to have them every week. Next week, we hope to have a member of Congress to be named, and we're going to have more fun guests and keep this as exciting and lively as possible. And thank you for joining the Feehery podcast, brought to you by EFB. EFB means?
Excellent for business.
Yeah, baby.